Welcome to the One Inside an Internal Family Systems podcast. I'm your host, Tammy Sollenberger. On today's podcast, Melissa Mose and I talk about help. My child has OCD. Hey everyone, I hope you're doing well. On today's episode, Melissa and I talk about families and children and OCD. I thought this episode was so helpful, and I just really appreciate Melissa's expertise. Melissa is a level 3 trained certified IFS therapist and a graduate of the Advanced Behavioral Therapy Training Institute. She specializes in treating anxiety disorders and OCD and has had a private practice in Southern California for nearly 30 years. In the show notes are her website, a link to the OCD Southern California conference that Melissa will be speaking at, plus information about her new IFS Consultation Group treating OCD and related disorders. All the information will be on the show notes. You can connect with me at IFS Tammy on Instagram and Twitter or the One Inside Facebook page. You can get a free Get to Know a Should part if you sign up for my sometimes monthly newsletter at tammysallenberger.com. And you can buy my book, The One Inside 30 Days to Your Authentic Self, wherever you get books. Enjoy. So, Melissa, I am so excited that you are joining me today to talk about your experience with OCD and your expertise with OCD. And why don't we just start with you telling everybody where you are in the world and what you see if you were to look out your nearest window?
Okay, I am in Calabasas, California. And if I look out my window, I see trees. It's really pretty here. Trees and little grassy area and lots of space.
Oh, lots of space. That sounds nice.
Yeah.
Is it always pretty there, or is it just a certain time of year that it's pretty?
You know, it's pretty. It's awfully pretty all the time, I have to say. Although, no, in the summer it gets rather dry. It gets dry here. It gets, but so the hills, instead of being that pretty green, turn a little crispy, turn a little brown.
Yeah.
But for the most part, I really can't complain about this area.
Yeah. Are you from there?
Yeah, I am.
Yeah.
I actually grew up not very far from where I am right now. Today, I'm in my office because I had a little construction going on at home. So I grew up very close to here and I just love it.
Good.
Back then it was nobody knew where Calabasas was. It was tiny and filled with eucalyptus groves.
What's happened that people now know where this is?
It's a little bit more in the public eye in terms of people being from Calabasas. So it has that known entity. It's got some star quality going on.
Is there a star that you have met that lives there, or a star that you like that lives in your town?
It's funny, I could give you a range. From when I was really little, and there was an old actor named Dennis Weaver who's down the street from me. Steve Garvey from the Dodgers was nearby. We used to trick or treat at his house.
I would love it if you felt comfortable sharing sort of the story of your daughter and sort of how you got so passionate about the hope and the treatment of OCD.
Okay, yeah, she has given me permission to speak about her. I'm always really careful about that. When she was she was 8 years old, and I had been, I was a therapist. I've been a therapist for, I think my first internship was 30 years ago. So I'd been a therapist for a long time. So I would think I would have been equipped to handle this, but I wasn't. She woke up one day, it was December 26th, and she had a sudden onset, very severe case of OCD. It was just like she was a different person all of a sudden, and she was asking questions, a million questions. It was about cookies. that she had made with her dad and had been in the refrigerator, in plastic wrap, and then you cut them. Did I swallow plastic wrap? How do you know I didn't swallow plastic wrap? What if I did swallow plastic wrap? Would I be dead by now if I'd swallowed plastic wrap? And this went on for like hours. And so something was clearly wrong, and it sort of evolved from there. And so should I go into first? I discovered something called PANDAS, which is pediatric autoimmune neuropsychiatric disorder associated with strep, which is a long, and there's PANS now too, which is a long way of saying basically there are things that will cause sudden onset features that resemble OCD or that are obsessive compulsive disorder. So we discovered that as we went along. And but in the meantime, I had a hard time getting help for her. And back then, that was over 10 years ago, there wasn't a lot of treatment. Even here in the LA area, I couldn't find people who really knew how to treat obsessive compulsive disorder in the way that I really needed. And so she ended up at UCLA's intensive outpatient program. And there I watched her get better. Like this was a little girl who had couldn't go in her bedroom, wouldn't eat a lot of food, was afraid things were poisoned. And so we were really, we were desperate. And she went to UCLA, and in a matter of 3 weeks, I started seeing improvement. And she made, a really quick recovery. And so at that point, I decided, I want to do that. Talk therapy is great. I help a lot of people. I worked with teenagers and their families. I came from a systems perspective, and I did a lot of depth psychology work at the time. But I thought, I want to help people like this. And so I went back and retrained myself, and I studied at the Behavioral Therapy Training Institute, and I learned how to do ERP, and I got very involved in the International OCD Foundation community. And that's how I met a community of people that are just wonderful, warm people, and who really are helping a lot of folks. The conference was a profound experience for me. I walked in as a mom, not as a therapist, and just met all of these people, sufferers, clinicians, researchers, all there who really understood what I was going through. And I just cried. I was just this is amazing. So I got very involved and started specializing in that kind of work. And so that's what I do now. And 95% of my those people with OCD are their family members. I work with a lot of parents, actually. She, after, ups and downs a little bit, never anything severe, and is doing great right now. Now, there is a little hitch, which is that she really, really doesn't like the idea of therapy because it was hard. So that's where I love, my other passion, which is IFS, and began to see a way to kind of marry the two.
And so at what point in your experience, did you discover IFS?
Okay, so I discovered IFS a few years into this. I think 2014, was when I kind of first began to know about it. And so it was later than when she was going, a few years after, handful of years after. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. And so one of the things that you were saying earlier was that you really were you began to help kids with OCD and their families. And sort of, it sounded like And from what you sent me, that you really have a desire to help the family members too. So tell me a little bit about that and the importance of helping the family members with kids with OCD.
Right. Well, I have had the experience of watching the things that I was doing with my daughter be the exact wrong thing. It's so counterintuitive. You want to reassure them, you want to help them understand that everything's going to be okay, and that it's okay, if you can't eat that, we'll give you this, and you naturally want to help, right? And what happens is that with OCD, these kinds of accommodations end up reinforcing the obsessive compulsive patterns, because what we're essentially doing is agreeing that anxiety is intolerable and we need to exile that part, right?
Oh, okay.
And we'll do anything. I'll do backflips. I'll buy you, 3 different meals until we find the right one. And we'll, I'll reassure you 20 times that that's fine. And so what happens is, because we're hardwired to, protect our children, our protectors get real active, and we do OCD with our child, for lack of a better way to put it. We very easily get on the team with the compulsive parts and put out that fire again and again. And with any kind of a cycle, what you practice, you get better at, right? So that just reinforces this pattern of, let's get rid of this feeling. And so it's a really challenging thing to sit with your own anxiety and pain while you watch your child suffer. So this was my first way of bringing IFS into OCD treatment, was really with the work with family members, in terms of helping those parts begin to trust enough that they could step back and just really be present with their child as they were suffering, or their teen, or their partner, and be able to be with all of the different experiences that were coming up without trying to fix it. So right now I work with a lot of parents, and I think, especially if I'm working with kids and teens, but also when I'm working with an individual who, for instance, it's full to have family members on board, so that, we can help reduce, what we would call accommodation, or, managers and firefighters jumping in to help.
Yeah, what you said, you wrote this sentence, and I thought this was a beautiful sentence. Our intuitive response to OCD often accommodate and reinforce it.
Right. So naturally, a part of me, what I affectionately call my mama bear part, is going to come up and say, no, it's okay. Look, there's nothing to be afraid of. Right. But, when it comes to obsessive compulsive disorder, and I realize, I'm not a big fan of diagnosing either, but I'm probably going to use that term a lot. A big part of what happens is that, the compulsive get real active. It's a protector, right? It's a protective pattern. So, when my mama bear parts jump up, it just reinforces the cycle.
Yeah. So if and as a mom, I'm totally getting this. So so if my son, he's 11 and he has some anxiety, and so if he's anxious about, like, today, like, they don't have to wear masks at school anymore, but he loves wearing a mask. It makes him feel really comfortable. And he did not have a mask in his book bag. And so he started getting really anxious. I need a mask, da, 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 da. And I did exactly what you said not to do. I'm like, it's okay. It's fine. We're going to figure it out. Let's see if we can find you a mask. And then, like, as soon as we got into school, he was like, do they have, do you ask them, do you have temporary masks? And she got me a temporary mask. I'm like, look, okay, everything's okay. You have your mask. Everything's okay.
Mhm.
So what would be the the response that would not be accommodating and reinforcing? Like what
Yeah.
would be I don't
Okay.
want to say a better, I don't want to say it
I,
that way, but
no, I understand what you're saying. And I do want to sort of differentiate if, reassuring our kids is fundamentally bad, right?
right.
And if it just happens to be that one of the primary categories or ways of doing compulsions is reassurance seeking, right? So if you have somebody with OCD,
Right.
it's going to be a little extra something you want to watch, right? Because reassurance seeking is kind of one of these patterns that reinforce the, that. So, but
Yes.
to,
Okay. Yes.
but to answer your question, I think that when we see our kid kind of flare up with a little anxiety, whatever, or fear or nervousness or whatever, to first really check in and notice like what jumps up is that part that wants to fix it or wants to reassure. And if I realize that's mine, right? Like
Mm.
that's like I'm uncomfortable with that. I don't want them to suffer. So getting a little bit more present and checking in with, well, what, you know, like having the confidence, I think is an important aspect of it.
Mm.
The confidence that, yes, this is a hard moment and you're nervous, and I can really have compassion for your nervousness. And at the same time, I have all the confidence in the world that you can handle it.
Mm.
So now what, like given that, compassion and confidence are just really key. And then you can open the space to, what are your thoughts here? Or let's go see what we can do. You know, do you need me to help?
Oh, yeah.
Or do you think you've got this, to really help that trust? Because I think what happens a lot is that internally people's systems lose the ability to trust that anxiety, fear, discomfort, uncertainty are tolerable, and in fact they're there for a reason. They can't hurt you.
Mm.
And that it's something that we could just experience and be with in a different way. And I guess, with kids, you really just want to anchor that it's okay to feel that way.
Mm.
We can be anxious and still do our lives, still go to school, still, uh, you know, figure out what's next.
If when your daughter though, or we don't have to say that, but if say somebody, say a parent is listening and their kid is in that, like they're so blended with a part of them that believes I might have eaten the plastic and I might die. Like I
Mm-hmm.
can't focus on getting my shoes on for school because I ate the plastic and I might die, or I might have eaten the
Mm-hmm.
plastic and I might die. What do you suggest
Right.
a parent do at that moment? And you're like, we put your shoes on. We have to
Right.
go to school.
No. Yeah, I it's so tough. It's so tough. And I want to be sure to say that I've done it wrong a million times, if we want to use that word wrong. It's hard, but ideally, we first of all check in and kind of down regulate our own nervous systems, right? So,
Yeah.
part of me is worried about carpool or being on time or where I have the errands I was going to run afterwards if we're late. And we just sort of go, okay, this isn't about me. This little person here is suffering, right?
Mm.
This little person has a problem. So
Mm.
how can I be, getting really present and really clear that, all right, all of these parts that are jumping in can relax a little bit. And then from a place of that, that self-led with just enough access to that energy where I can be curious and I can kind of get down and be with a child and say, okay, I know this is scary. and really make that contact that I'm not scared, right? I'm not scared of your, whatever your parts are afraid of right now. Because just that aspect of being, for me to be able to be with whatever comes up is very soothing.
Mm.
And then we can get the child oriented back to right now. Like right now, we know that you're okay, right? I can't necessarily, I'm not going to say this to a kid, but in my head, I'm thinking, none of us have any certainty about, am I going to die today?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So there's that. But right now we know we're okay. Let's look around. We're okay. And I know it's scary. I know it's hard. I know you're really uncomfortable, but I have 100% faith in you that I know you can get those shoes on, even though you're scared. Let's see what we can do. Because I'm wanting to demonstrate that big feelings are okay, and we don't have to give into them.
Yeah. That's great.
That's kind of the best we can do, really, is model that and try and stay in that place where we're both compassionate and confident. And that's just the bottom line.
Love that. I love it. So
Yeah.
that is a great segue into this idea that you said, IFS as compassionate exposure, or changing the meaning of ERP from exposure and response prevention to encounter and relate to protectors. So tell me about
Right.
that. Encounter
That's
and
my
relate
corny
to
little,
protectors. I love it. It's great.
Yeah. One of the things my daughter was saying yesterday is how acronyms that are made into, just because, are really annoying. And that one's really annoying to me, but I made it up, so I'll own it. I really do. ERP gets people have a hard time with the concept of exposure therapy, especially in the IFS world, and understandably so. It can be harsh, it can be scary, but I come from a place of also seeing that it works, and not just in theory. Like, I know, I want to say thousands of people from being at conferences, but whose lives are better because of being willing to do exposures. That said, exposures don't have to be done from a manager in the therapist, or a manager part, or a part that has this agenda of getting better. Exposure, really, in my mind, is just exactly what we do in IFS all the time. Is we get to know our parts and we befriend them. We don't try and get rid of them. We don't talk about them, right? That's the main right. difference. The reason why I feel IFS and ERP go well together is both approaches, even though people see them as highly different, both approaches are not about talking about what's going on. It's an experience. Yeah. It's an encounter. It's turn and face it, befriend it, embrace it, be with it, learn from it, get curious about it. So in every sense of the word, when I do exposure, I'm thinking of it as an encounter with parts. And yeah, we relate to the protectors differently, right? So rather than, it does sound awful, exposure and response prevention, in case people don't know ERP is right, exposure and response prevention, the trigger, and prevent them from their rituals or their responses that make them feel better. And so, yeah, that sounds awful.
And why would we want to do that? No,
why would you do
you.
In fact, yeah. And I actually had a conversation with Dick recently. I hadn't had the opportunity to talk with him about all this, and I was saying just this, and he said exactly that. Like, why would you do that?
Right.
And I said, well, because it works, right? It is actually what we do in IFS. And he kind of cocked his head at me. And but it may be a little, I don't know, outside of the box, but I realized from listening to one of your previous podcasts on the Enneagram that I am a true dyed-in-the-wool 9. So I'm going to, marry the opposites here and say that, yes, I think that what we're doing in IFS isn't that far off from exposure. It's being with, it's encountering protectors and asking them to step back rather than preventing them from doing their thing.
Yeah, well, it's like, what are we exposing? I think that's what you mean. Tell me if this is what you mean. I feel like it's exposure to self, maybe. So we're exposing it to self, and then self is compassionate and confident. And so when the part is exposed to self, who's compassionate and confident, then it can maybe help get to I was going to say help do the thing, or also help kind of get to the exile. Or if we're thinking that the OCD symptoms are protective parts that are protecting exiles, then if the protective parts get exposed to self, then they will help self be with the exiles.
See, now that's an interesting way. Like this is like a moment by moment evolving theoretical approach. So I like what you just said. It's different than how I've thought of it. And in that when I'm kind of keeping both sides of my brain in this process, exposure in traditional OCD therapy is exposure to something that causes fear or it's to a trigger, right?
Yeah.
So when compulsive parts will give us space to be with what we trigger, which is fear or uncertainty, my sense of things is what happens is if we can allow ourselves to experience that exiled anxiety, fear, guilt, sense of responsibility, whatever those exiles are carrying. And a lot of times with OCD, it is about its uncertainty and not knowing. And so we encounter that and parts and from a self-led place, with self-energy and with curiosity and with some clarity, like what is that anxiety that we've been talking about, right? Like we can notice the sensations in the body and get curious about this. We can notice the racing thoughts or sense of impending doom or whatever is being experienced. We can be with that. We can be exposed to that with enough self-energy present. What happens is that it really develops the trust in a person's system. So clients will say, we'll just have this experience of, hey, I can be with that. That isn't something I need to get rid of. Like I can be with that part. And so my experience is that it really facilitates the trust in a system and the self-to-part relationship that we're always trying to foster. I want to use, I think it's Mary Kruger who uses the term rudimentary unburdening about the 12 steps and IFS. Like, it is kind of an unburdening, and not kind of. I do, we do unburdening. We do the healing steps with exiles.
Yeah. And so one of the things that you said that I loved this is that when we do the unburdening, when we unburden the exiles, then you're able to prevent, I'm putting this in quotes, moving target syndrome, which is something that you find in OCD. So when we unburden the exiles, we prevent moving target syndrome. And I think
Uh-huh.
what you mean by that is I remember seeing a kid a long time ago who I think was in middle school and was afraid of the fire alarm going off. So we did all this work
Mhm.
around the fire alarm going off. Then I saw her a couple of years ago and she was in high school and then she was afraid of throwing up. And I was like, yeah, it sort of switches, right? Like, so now
Mhm.
it's fire alarms
Yeah.
and it's throwing up and sort of those typical things we see in kids. Is that what you
Yep.
mean by moving target syndrome?
Mhm. Yeah,
Okay.
that's exactly what I mean. Yeah, it's like I'm not checking the car alarm 3 times anymore or the stove anymore, but now I'm doing this other thing like rereading my paper 7 times before I submit it. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, the
Okay.
whack-a-mole phenomenon,
Right. Okay.
right? And think about it. If you have a fundamental inability to, uh, let's see, let me say this in an IFS kind of way. If exiles are carrying the belief that in uncertainty is intolerable, I don't, I need to be sure, right?
Hmm.
Otherwise, XYZ. Um, and yeah, and we resolve it in one specific content area. It makes sense that it would just pop up in another specific content area unless you actually really go to that deep place and get to the core fear, right? Which from the OCD perspective, which is really, what are those beliefs that these exiles are carrying about themselves and the world? And healing that really, I do almost all OCD work and I see incredible shifts and people coming back after an unburdening session and saying, it's the weirdest thing, but I'm not having all those thoughts anymore.
Wow. Wow.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, it's powerful.
Well, okay. So, and I think this makes sense because if we heal and unburden the exile who believes if I don't have certainty that I'm not safe in the world, and
Mhm.
um, so if I don't have certainty that I'm not safe, is that a common belief that you hear in exiles with people that suffer with OCD?
It's very, very common.
Okay.
It's that and the responsibility, of for being responsible for harm coming to other people if I didn't have the right thought or check this or that. But uncertainty, that's uncertainty. Almost all of it kind of boils down to uncertainty in some way. And um, even if it's about shame and being bad or responsible or guilty,
Mm.
there are some definitely some common exiles or burdens that I
Yeah.
see. Uncertainty is huge.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And so then if we have the protector that says, if I'm certain, I think with mine, the one that I'm thinking of specifically, it was like, okay, so then the principal, so this is probably the wrong thing to do. The principal was going to tell her this is when the fire alarm's going to go off. So now we're
Mhm.
all going to know, or she's not going to go to school those days. So that
Right.
was our whack-a-mole approach, which didn't actually
Mhm.
get to the exile. It just kind of maybe calmed the protector down that says, okay, now we know when the fire alarm's going to
Right.
go off. And so we got to the protector, but then there's going to be, because we didn't get to the exile, there's going to be another protector that comes in and says, okay, well, now we really need to know that, you know, we need to
Mhm.
work hard to make sure that we always get A's or whatever it's going to be.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. So uh, it, you know, it, I think that when you do more over time, if you continue to work with protectors and really foster that ability to recognize the part and blend from the part and get the part to step back. So it's like, okay, this is my confessing protector or reassurance seeking protector, or this is my checking protector, the one that does this. So over time, if you deal with it in that way, what I think really happens is the system develops enough trust that eventually you have some of this more how unburdenings can happen over time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so so people who get relief and experience, OCD being better or even gone, which it does. There's a common misconception that there's no cure, and people do get better. So that's an important piece. And people get better without a quote unquote unburdening exiles, but my hunch is that's what's happening.
Mm. Right, that somehow the exiles get, even if they're doing CBT or whatever they're doing, that somehow the exiles get some sort of feeling of safety from
Right.
the self.
Yeah, from having the experience of,
Mm.
we can look at and be with anxiety, uncertainty, fear, discomfort differently.
I love that. The last thing you said, which I definitely want to make sure we touch on, is that about the importance of presence with the things as they are, and the role of meditation in
Right.
our being able to practice the idea of presence with the way things are as they are right now.
Mm-hmm. Right. I think that my long-standing relationship with meditation, I discovered Buddhism in college, and I started meditating and studying, and so I've always had this at the core of what I do. Only in the early days of therapy, you couldn't talk about mindfulness and meditation at all. It was, you get looked at funny. But it's always informed how I practice. And what I began to notice is that in the traditional OCD treatment world, increasingly there's an awareness of the value of mindfulness and the ability to, observe thoughts and feelings, right? Which is essentially, I am not my thoughts and I'm not my feelings. They come and they go, and I'm here observing. And of course, there's a lot of those echoes in IFS, in that there's mindfulness, and then we go beyond mindfulness and we actually develop that, relationship with parts, which takes it beyond that. But because of that, I think that's where I started to see that these two things might be more alike than different. And I got real interested in sort of not polarizing,
Yeah.
and between IFS and the behavioral exposure world. And so for me, again, what you practice, you get better at. And meditation is one of those ways in which we practice being present, and being able to open to whatever arises inside. And I think that's at the core of all of it. It's simple, right? As they say, simple but not easy, but simple, but also just beautifully complex in that there is no one way. And, with all of these ways, with these different, I don't know, I guess through these different approaches coming at it from different parts, almost like different parts of the elephant kind of approach, but it just feels like lots can shift when we just get curious and we see each, like for me, there isn't a system or a protocol or a thing to do, even though, in IFS we have the Fs and we have the healing steps and we have sort of a general structure, same in ERP, but really you're sitting with a person who's having experiences. And, my job is to help people really befriend those parts and develop internal trust and harmony and balance among them, so that there isn't this relentless felt sense that I need to, or I have to, or I can't, or whatever, those firefighters are jumping in to make a person feel compelled to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and I think there's the hope of, for someone who's listening, or a parent of a kid who is struggling with this, that there's the hope that there's can be some unblending and some space, so that I am not just compelled. Because if there's a little bit of space or a little bit of unblending, then I can be with what's compelled inside of me and don't have
Mm-hmm.
to then be compelled, which is then going to
Mm-hmm.
starts the whole sort of roller coaster or hamster wheel thing going on. So if there's a
Right.
little bit of space, a little bit of knowing, a little bit of being with, then that really
Right.
changes the whole flow.
Right. 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 When there is that ability to, uh, let's see, get, appreciate that there's a part of me that's trying to be hopeful.
Mm.
It's hard. That's a harder sell with OCD, because compulsive parts can be extremely unrelenting and difficult to live with, right?
Yeah, yeah,
But when that relationship gets fostered and there's a respect in that, okay, this is a part of me that's trying to do something positive. Maybe I can meet that need another way. Or obsessive parts that are trying to prevent something bad from happening.
yeah,
What is, people really struggle with, I don't know, what's the point of that? Just like critics that are so mean,
yeah, right.
like, how is that trying to protect me exactly? Like, that doesn't quite make sense. But that's the irony of it, is that those, in trying to prevent something bad from ever happening,
Yeah,
these parts that obsess and worry and kind of can ruin your life.
yeah,
They can, and they create anxiety and they create discomfort, just like, the critic that's trying to protect us triggers shame, right? And
right,
then
right.
firefighters jump in and fix it, and then there's more. And so,
Yeah, right.
uh, OCD really lends itself well to this model, because people naturally talk about the bully in my brain,
Mm.
and clinicians are always saying, you got to talk back to the bully and, conquer that, so it, there's an awareness that there are parts that these, it's just a shift in terms of how we relate to them.
You're also saying that it is what we do in IFS. And so it's not something to be intimidated. Like maybe parts of us can get intimidated, or parts of us can be overwhelmed, or parts of us can be hopeless. Or parts of us
Mhm.
can join the parts of our clients that's hopeless. And then we're like, wait a minute, it is the bully in our brain. And there are parts of us that don't want to friend bullies, right? Bullies are terrible and they're
Yeah,
mean and we're scared of them. But we know when in IFS that we when we befriend the bully is not what it seems to be.
that's right. That's right. When you really actually are able to get to know it and see what it's trying to do and see how hard it's working. Uh, I do find that a lot of obsessive parts feel that they are not working hard enough, and there is a real reluctance. It takes a fair amount of trust and and uh, work to get some of these obsessive parts to stop saying, well, this is going to be your fault and something terrible is going to happen, and throw these horrible images. They can be very horrible,
Mm.
intrusive images that people are experiencing kind of all day long, and it can be pretty brutal. So it's hard to appreciate those parts
Yeah.
at first, right?
Yeah.
But when you really recognize that part's just trying so hard to make sure that the just unfathomable, unacceptable, worst possible things don't happen, and we can get on board with that.
Right. I was thinking,
Uh,
right, if you just turn to the part as it, is giving you this such a hard time, and you turn to the part and say, like, I know you're afraid. Like, I
yeah,
know you're afraid, or I know you're protecting who inside of me is afraid, and how
yeah,
different that might feel, even if you
yeah.
have to say that 100 times a day.
Right, right. And letting it be there, right? Letting
Yeah, right.
that part be, and and that's really key because we're not trying to get rid of them, and we know that in IFS, but it's also really, it's if you try and stop obsessive thoughts, that's a compulsion, right? That just makes everything worse. And
Wow.
plus it doesn't
Okay.
work.
Right, right. It's a
So,
manager, right? A manager trying to stop it. And so,
uh-huh.
yes, okay,
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or replace it. Like mental rituals are notoriously difficult to deal with because it's very hard to, if you're washing your hands, people can call you out on that,
Yeah.
or you can see that it's happening, or they become red and chapped. But when you're constantly reassuring yourself, like, so you have a part that it's like, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay. Uh, or a part that's, you know, going over something and saying, explaining how it doesn't make any sense and it's fine. Or um, the mental rituals are just, they're tough.
Mm.
And so being able to, I don't know, to really recognize, I think that's part of what we have to be careful of as therapists is that it's very easy for us to get on board with compulsive parts, or it's to go ahead and get involved in the obsessing and the compulsing without even realizing it.
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
Right. Like aligning with the certain parts.
yeah, because we want people to feel better. Our therapist parts want to help people. So it's a process that is, it's just very unique, and I really love, I love the work, and I love, I can come up with these ideas of how it is, oh well, our obsessions managers, our compulsions, no, compulsions are managers and firefighters. And what I realize at the end of the day is that everybody's system is unique,
Mm.
and these obsessions and compulsions, they tend to fall into very clear um, groups when you work with a lot of OCD, right? They there are decontamination rituals, there are checking rituals, the ones that we know about. Typically most people think of OCD as those kinds of rituals, but then there's also the reassurance seeking, and avoidance is also a ritual.
Mm.
There's also mental rituals. So, there's these categories and boxes that we can check if you know a lot about OCD, and you see people um, hour after hour, day after day, you see the patterns. But what IFS brings to the work is a much more nuanced sense of, okay, so is that a manager checking all these things in order to prevent your anxiety, because just in case, right? Or is that checking part like fixing anxiety once it's been triggered? And um, or both, and does it matter? And you just develop a relationship with each person's system, and it makes it's fascinating because it just isn't the same for everybody.
Mm. Yeah. I love the way you say that too, because then we know, though, that those are protectors, managers and
Mhm.
firefighters, and then the anxiety there is the exile, and we want to
Mhm.
go there. That's where we want to go. And
Yeah,
I'm sure
yeah.
with OCD, maybe more than other, and I'll use this, term lightly, disorders, that
Mhm.
that you're going to hang out with those protectors probably a lot more, and a lot more time, and a lot more maybe respectful of those protectors, and
Mhm.
getting your own parts that are annoyed with them to calm down, so you can
Right,
go, they can give you permission to go to the part that's holding the anxiety, the exhale.
right, right. And that's the key. It's always willingness right? It's never,
Mm.
and anybody who does ERP would say the same thing, but with IFS, it's especially respectful. And that, would that part that wants you to go wash right now be willing to relax a little bit? Would that part that wants you to check, or, is asking me that question, is that part willing to give us a little space so we can see what happens?
I love that.
Right.
That's great.
And
Yeah.
and when that will happen, then we're with the exile, and we're with, well, if I don't have the right thought, then if something bad happens, it was my fault. And then you're right there, and you're with that vulnerable part that is fearful and or disgusted, filled with shame. Like there's those specific kinds of burdens that come up, that's that when you with a lot of OCD, you start to see certain things again and again too, that but yes, you really want to work with those protectors until they're willing to give space, and they do.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
Melissa, thank you for giving hope. As you said that, I thought, and they will, and they do. And I feel like that is the hope that you're
Right.
wanting to express and share with people that are struggling, or people, family members of kids, or other people that are struggling, that there's freedom and hope. And I just am so glad you came on today to talk about
Yeah,
that.
me too. I absolutely am, as well. So thank you for having
You're
me.
welcome. Thank you. And if people want to get in touch with you, what is the best way to get in touch with you?
My website is melissamosemft.com, or my email, melissa@melissamosemft.com. And there's a sign up on my website to be on the newsletter and hear about various things. Well, if people want to know more about OCD in particular, I am the president of the Southern California affiliate of the International OCD Foundation, and we have a conference on April 30th. And it's a big conference, and it's virtual. So go to the OCDSoCal.org website. And any information about OCD in particular, iocdf.org is a fantastic resource. And then I am forming a new parent group for parents who are interested in how to help their kids and teens. And I have a young adult and teen group forming as well. So I think those are the things that I would turn people to. And I think that's really it. I'm just very excited that this topic is, being talked about, and that, we're in a place where we can just share more about something that affects a lot of people, especially right now in this world.
Thanks for hanging out today. If you liked this episode, make sure you subscribe. And if you really like this episode, share it with a friend and leave a review. You can follow me on Instagram at IFS Tammy, and join our community on Facebook at the One Inside Podcast. Talk to you next time.